people identify with many aspects of the community they're a part of.
Yeah.
You being a part of the Fitzroy community,
Yeah.
do you feel you're a part of that community or apart from that community?
Increasingly, I think I'm a part of it. And I think the things that I particularly identify with in Fitzroy is one I suppose it's pub scene. It's got a particularly vibrant pub scene here. And also, I suppose, just the physical layout of the suburb as well. So, the suburb's quite small. The streets are reasonably narrow, and so I can live here without spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a car. So I can walk around everywhere, which I think is a real luxury.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that sort of things I identify with in Fitzroy is its intimacy.
That's interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Because cars represent isolation and encapsulation, and I guess within a city the size of Fitzroy, that notion would be theoretical, really, rather than a practical one.
Yeah.
So where does communication in terms of? So I'm getting confused here. Where does communication fit into the notion of being a part of Fitzroy?
Well, communication just in terms of having being able to run into people at your shop, at your pub, or when you walk around the suburb, which is pretty interesting because historically Fitzroy is a suburb that's been incredibly undervalued, and it's been undervalued for a number of reasons. But this is an old working class suburb, and with lots and lots of light industry and small sort of artisan workshops and lots of artists in the district and this sort of thing. But it was the very the working class nature of the suburb, i.e. the small shitty workers' cottages, and these are the things that were only in the 1960s were seen as slums and were actually bulldozed and pulled down. But it's that heritage now which is making it a very special place to live. Because working people often value things like pubs and intimacy much more than other people or the other classes of people that maybe live much more professional, alienated lives or managed lives.
Yeah. And do you find it interesting? I find it interesting, but how do you feel about the fact that, in Fitzroy specifically, not that different to other surrounding suburbs, with Fitzroy's commission flats, for example, they were brought up and there was this whole notion that it'll unify, it'll have that village kind of communication within one fixed site.
Yeah.
Okay, we can look at that and analyse that, but do you find it interesting that notion has been rejected, yet at present, for example, in and around Melbourne, I'm sure lots of other cities in the world, there's high density cohabitation is becoming, or has already become fashionable.
Yeah.
Do you find that ironic?
Yeah, it is. Well, particularly I suppose that, a lot of poor families and poor people moved out of Fitzroy in the 50s and 60s, during the boom years, the long post-war boom, to get better quality housing, to get larger blocks and gardens and, bigger lounge rooms and this sort of thing. But unfortunately, I think in some suburbs, you don't have the same luxury of lifestyle. So lifestyle has become much more important to a lot of people, I think. But I don't know. People generally, or especially professional people, are working much longer hours too. So I think that the small apartments suit a very low maintenance life. Low maintenance life and sort of no gardens and no dogs and no pets, and you only got one room to vacuum. A couple of dishes to put away, sort of thing. And you can,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because you're actually saying that's eliminated the notion of the backyard open fence conversation. So do you think that contemporary high density units and things. Do you think that that's kind of imposing a kind of isolation because there isn't that facility to communicate over the back fence, if you like? I mean, I know it's yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I think it does, but I think it also, like, the place I live in Fitzroy, I've lived here for 14 years, but the place I live in has got no backyard. It's quite small, but that means that in terms of meeting people, I rely much more on pubs, and I rely much more on cafes, and I rely much more on parks and stuff like that, because you get three sort of people in my house, and it's a little bit claustrophobic, so yeah, yeah, but
well, that's interesting because it's a very old notion actually, where houses in the past didn't really have yards, especially in inner cities, and even in ancient cities.
Yeah.
People were, well, in a sense, they were coerced to congregate in things like the village square or the piazza, if you like.
Yeah.
With high density housing and that whole new approach to housing in inner suburbs, it's not that different from the past, even though it's being marketed as different, as modern, etc., etc. How do you feel about that notion of modernity and in relation to people living together in a very small area?
Yeah. Well, I think that's maybe what a lot of people are looking for in Fitzroy. So that's, sort of housing prices have gone through the roof here, and, there's lots of developments happening all over the place, especially, there's sort of, you've got all these perfume remains of the industrial era,
Yeah.
So you've got all these factories and all these sort of warehouses, which were in some cases were, productive industries only last year, or 10 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, which are becoming, places to live and stuff like that. So it is bringing a lot of people into the suburb, but then again, is everyone contributing? So Fitzroy it didn't just appear; it was built by people, and with any sort of interesting culture, it came into being from people sacrificing, people putting in the legwork, people, making artist spaces, and people making pubs that can cultivate, artists. Yeah. Or musicians, or this sort of thing. So, suburbs need places where you can go and play a guitar incredibly badly. It needs places for hacks. And because that's how you experiment, and that's how culture is produced.
Sure. And all these notions you talk about, the musicians, the artists, pubs. To me, it all equals communication.
Yeah.
Within a particular site, being Fitzroy in this instance. Now, where before Fitzroy, where did you come from, Craig? What was your background?
Yeah. Well, I suppose my background is in quite a small community, so I also understand the negative sides of community. I mean, it can be stifling, Yeah. But this was in a small country town in Tasmania, which was very insular, very inward looking. It was sort of it was okay till you're 17. You sort of hang out with your mates and drink beer and ride around on mountain bikes and BMXs and this sort of thing. But there was also a few opportunities. So a few opportunities in that community for education, or for getting jobs outside of certain very narrow trades or something like that. Yeah. So certainly I've got a lot of baggage from that community that I've brought to Melbourne, and I think that's a lot. A lot of outsiders, when they come to Melbourne, they often go to areas where there are strong communities. Like St Kilda, and St Kilda's where I first came to in the mid '80s, and then Fitzroy, and St Kilda was in the '80s was just starting to peter off, or for all the things that I identify with Fitzroy as making an interesting place to live. Those things were just starting to fade. So there was the Prince of Wales you know, had a huge punk scene, and then which I thought was fantastic, you know, as a naive country kid.
Crystal Ballroom.
And the Crystal Ballroom, and then there was the huge fire trap on the Esplanade, which was
Cinderbox.
The venue. Yeah, yeah, and of course the Esplanade Hotel as well,
yeah.
which is sort of one of the, perhaps the only pub of its type in the entire district. Yeah.
And people have hung on, have hung on to that.
Yeah.
Esplanade notion of keeping it intact. It represents an intact community, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, but there's nothing wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with gentrification. You know, there's nothing wrong with being able to get a good coffee or a good focaccia or something like that. But you know, there's nothing wrong with money coming into a district. It's just how it's used. And if that money is just used to create a very sterile, boring environment, you know,
we'll say that franchises and multinational companies, for example, have been accused of homogenising small communities.
Yeah.
Have you seen instances of that, for example,
yeah,
in your community?
Yeah, well, I think some you know, one of the unique things about Fitzroy, I think, from maybe from living in a few other places around the world too, but you know, a couple other Melbourne suburbs, is it does have a quite a strong identity that measures itself from other parts of the city, and often measures it in terms of, okay, we're different. We're not going to buy into this often American style of development, which is about creating common tastes. So huge, or pretending there is such a thing, of either food or clothing or whatever, simply so they can get larger markets.
Do you think people that go to these particular, say, multinational stores or franchise companies, in McDonald's, what have you, do you think they go there out of pure need, or is it with identifying with maybe a larger village outside of their own?
I think it's laziness. It's pure laziness. I mean, that's McDonald's is lazy food.
Lazy food, let's call it.
Yeah, it's lazy. I mean, and I'm sometimes I've been to the place a few times, and just you're feeling a bit run down, you're feeling a bit tired, and this is where the sort of the easy franchise food fits into. You're coming home from work and you can't be buggered sort of cooking, right? You just go and get a hamburger, and I mean that's what these things sort of profit on. If people only looked at the history of their own, or environment, and took advantage of some of the different ethnicities we have here, and sort of the amazing amount of food that some of the Asian cultures, Vietnamese cultures, have introduced into Fitzroy. You don't have to go down to Smith Street, and look at a lot of the shops there. So,
yeah.
So it's just stuff like that takes effort. It takes time, and that's sort of which could be one of the the bad the negative things that it's happening to Fitzroy is you've got a lot of young professional people that move here that are money rich but time poor, and they treat the suburb as a dormitory suburb, certainly not putting a lot of legwork into creating a vibrant culture here, which might take, I don't know what form that takes, but could be a whole bunch of things.
Well, that sounds to me like it's consistent with the laziness of going to the McDonald's type of stores.
Yeah.
You move into an instant community and expect some kind of immediate gratification from being part of that.
Yeah. And that community may just be a fading memory, because the people that actually created that community, a lot of the time can't afford to live here anymore. So they've had to move to other suburbs.
What do you think? What do you think causes that inaffordability for those people? Do you think it's economics within the area, or is it the impact from the world outside of the community, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's just it depends. What the marketability of your vocation often. So if you're a writer, or if you're, an artist or something like that, you often, I'm not being too romantic, I hope, but you often struggle for your existence a lot more, because there's not a lot of money in these fields. Often,
No.
So, or just, maybe just like reading books, and you don't want to work 40 hours a week. You just want to spend, 20 of them reading books or stuff like that. But that's contributing.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, what about the factory worker from Fitzroy? There aren't that many factories left in the area, of course, but the factory worker who also has to struggle because there aren't many work opportunities in the area.
Yeah.
What's the difference between somebody like that or an artist who manages to live off very little?
Yeah.
What the impacts on the artist obviously different to the impacts on the factory worker.
Yeah.
Why do the factory workers leave the area and the artists stay, do you think?
Well, I don't, without sort of, I don't. Well, I think, often, one of the good things about Fitzroy is its sense of tolerance, and so you do get mixes. You do get factory workers and artists, and new migrants, and drinking in the same hotels and talking and stuff like that. And also rich people, and the poor people all mixing together. So. But I think in terms of amenities, so amenities for arts people, there's probably a lot more in this. There's probably a lot more in this suburb than there are for working people. So in terms of having good pubs to drink in and stuff like that, there's not many. They're all. It's not just only one or two. It's sort of that are retained any sort of local solid working heritage and working values.
Sure.
Yeah. So when others is much more fashion, fleeting, sort of tourist tire kicker type,
When you moved to the area, did you have expectations? What were you expecting from a community such as Fitzroy?
Yeah. Well, I it was fairly. Wasn't a conscious sort of calculated reason for coming here. It was simply because I'd had a series of really shitty share houses, right? And I sort of wanted to live with an older, more stable person. I think I was only 20 or 21 or something like that, right? And it just happened to be someone who was a bit older than me, right? Who wanted to get a share house because he wanted to move out of the suburbs and he wanted to move into the inner city, and when I first came to Fitzroy, I thought, yuck, there's no trees, and I remember looking down Brunswick Street, and this was only, 87, something like 88, and just looking down Brunswick Street and thinking, what a desert, it's like, wasn't a tree in sight, and there was just two, shonky little cafes, like the Black Cat and Mario's and Pat Baker's, and perhaps the Punters Club as well, and a couple of really rough pubs, the Provincial and Colonial and Champion, the Gertrude Street set. Yeah. But I didn't really want to move here. I thought, I actually thought it was quite alienating, urban environment, But but the thing that why I moved here, I just found a really good house, which happened to be on Napier Street where I live now.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that hasn't changed much, has it really? From if we look in, I'm not going to use the word his story, but the past people have been attracted to cities because they provide facilities, employment, etc.
Yeah.
On the surface, those material things can be alienating. So how long did it take for you before that alienation started to dissipate, if you like? We became part of the community.
Yeah. It took a reasonably long time, and I think that how I became part of the community more was through share housing, so and often so when you're a student living on study and sort of thing, share houses provide cheap accommodation. And also you've got a bunch of friends hanging around, you got your ready-made friends, and that's really good if you're from, out of town. And single apartments or two-room houses have particularly always been high rents in Melbourne, so the more rooms you have, the cheaper they are. So I suppose living in big-roomed houses, that was one way. and also just hang out at pubs. And I think that, you know, a lot of pub owners in Fitzroy, not all, I mean, some are just into volume, just get as many people in and out as you can. But there's other pubs that do, you know, value a local lifestyle and value the idea of a local pub. And there's probably more pubs in Fitzroy than any other part of the country, or more, you know, in terms of concentrated area. You know. But, you know, like the Napier Hotel, you know, one I probably drink at the most. I mean, the publicans there don't allow large groups of males, you know, to come in. They don't allow you know, wedding parties, or they don't allow sort of football teams, or they don't allow, you know, things that threaten that sort of intimacy of the local. You know.
What if your neighbour was married and decided, who drinks there all the time, and decided to
that would be okay.
Right, so it's selective. Selective association.
Yeah, in a way. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because communities have boundaries, you know, and and also ultimately that loyalty pays off in a lot of other ways, you know, because you just don't want to be a publican where you're just raking in the cash each week. You know, you want to be a publican people sort of like, you know, or, you know, you're, as a publican, you're part of the community as well.
Yeah, and,
you know,
I guess the publicans made a lifestyle choice by making
decisions. It's a great lifestyle choice, as long as you don't sort of keep off the piss.
Well, do you think that whole notion of lifestyle that we've just talked about, do you think it's any different here to, say, any other part of the world? We'll stick to the Western notion of the world, or Western. So do you think that this phenomenon is unique to Fitzroy, to Melbourne?
Not at all. I don't think Fitzroy. You know, Fitzroy's got quite a, you know, I think is typical of many other inner city areas of Australia. Perhaps, you know, in London, you know, area, you know, so you got similar, you know, gentrification and you know, older residents being forced out, you know. But America's a little bit different, you know, because you know, they've got the problems with crime. So crime tends to, you know, make a lot of the inner cities inaccessible. But perhaps, you know, New York is an exception. Chicago, it's got quite a vibrant downtown, but certainly not LA.
Well, I find that kind of fascinating in itself, because I mean, Fitzroy is the oldest suburb of Melbourne, as we know.
Yeah.
Therefore, it has, you know, all those notions of history, blah blah blah. You'd think that there would be some parallels with that, the violence, for example, and crime. In Fitzroy, being so old and close to the city, etc., traditional spots for all activity to occur. There is a little bit of criminality in the area, sure, but it's not, you know, a big feature. Yeah. What makes that different to
fabric? You know, so that, you know, and that's so important to have a fabric. You know, and once that fabric is torn and divided, and you know, then people aren't going to, you know, necessarily respect their fellow citizen or understand their fellow citizen. You know, that is one of the things I really identify with in Fitzroy. It's just the most bizarre friendships. You know, two people. You know, you see the most unusual friendships. You know, based on sexuality or class or you know, genders or age and this sort of thing. And I think that's sort of special. And I think in terms of, okay, if people, you know, the inner cities are starting to gentrify or starting to become more important in the, you know, to, you know, the city's consciousness, or the, you know, much, or to the nation's consciousness anyway. We've got to learn something from it. You know what I mean? And that's, you know, this is Australia. You know, so it's.
But who's the teacher?
The community. You know, it's sort of, you know, it's like. You know?
But surely within a community where there are things happening over a very short period of time, there are people who lead, for example, people who make the initial moves.
Yeah, there are, you know. But I mean, you know, we see on television all the time these big, nasty pictures of, you know, of refugees coming into Australia, and we see, you know, the Canberra, and we see, you know, politicians in Canberra sort of stopping the refugees coming in and stuff. I mean, Canberra, I mean, what a city, so totally removed from what Australia is. You know what I mean? So, you know, I mean, if you want to refugees are 3 doors down from me. You know what I mean? This is what stuff we deal with. So when refugees come to this country, they come into this community. People tolerate them. You know.
Right. Well,
there's enough room.
There is enough room, and some people would say, well, that's kind of got the notion of the global village in it, where everybody's welcome and everybody's the same. Obviously, that's not the case when you compare somewhere like Canberra to Melbourne.
Yeah.
That's insane. I mean, how do you think that kind of notion of interactability, that village, global village notion, what does that mean to Fitzroy? I mean, has it made such an impact that it's changed the landscape of the place, the human landscape?
Well, I think global village is sort of a bit of a media term. I don't know how the media works. It always works on is, you know, generalising large populations so they can profit from it usually.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I think there is parts. The world isn't something that's out there somewhere, you know. I mean, it's not. You know, the world isn't something that begins in New York or you know, some other city. It's here, you know, and it's in most of our communities. You know, and that's where, you know, if you want to understand concepts of globalization without being too sort of hokey or parochial, you know, just have to look around where you live, because a lot of the big questions that we face in the future, you know, these things can be negotiated quite easily. You know what I mean? As Australians, you know, we're a small nation, 20 million people. You know, what is wrong with, you know, just getting a refugee and taking them to a pub in Fitzroy and giving them a beer? You know, what could be more Australian? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that assumes they want to go.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at, you are going to get cultural resistance. Now,
Yeah.
in which case, does the cultural resistance become segregation or homogenisation, if you like?
Yeah. And that's that balance, you know. So, you know, I think in terms of homogeneity, Australia should have been there. You know, we were woken pride in the 50s, you know, to you know, the most ruthless sort of, you know, egalitarian or whatever you want to call it, but conformity. You know, which is wonderful. It's wonderful if you're into that. Mm-hmm. But if you're part of a minority or part of a, you know, a discourse or a set of ideas that doesn't sort of necessarily, you know, agree with or identify with the utilitarian centre, and Australia's been incredibly discriminatory of those groups. So particularly, you know, I think of Aboriginals, or I think of homosexuals, or I think of women too. You know. Yeah.
Okay, and I mean, there are I'm just thinking of people who try and hijack or they try and terrorise a particular situation. I'm just thinking of, you know, things like, you know, computing. Everybody knows about hackers and the kind of things that they're trying to achieve. They're trying to disrupt the homogeneity that's being imposed.
Yeah.
Now, in an area like Fitzroy, who are, shall we say, the cultural hackers? Are there? Do you see them?
Yeah, all the time. You know, but I suppose there's cultural hackers, if you want to call them that, in the aesthetic sense. You know, so you know, so how people dress. You know, so they dress in very flamboyant, colourful sort of ways that, you know, that is sometimes seen as radical. It's not always radical. But then you got. I suppose you got a big homeless. You know, so not only have you got some of the highest property values and the highest sort of accelerating property values anywhere in the country, you know, in the city of Melbourne, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, you've got homeless people everywhere.